Trump administration's decision to revoke $400 million in federal funding from Columbia University under the guise of combating anti-Semitism is a transparent attempt to suppress pro-Palestinian activism on college campuses. The administration's move is not about ensuring the safety of Jewish students, but rather about silencing opposition to its policies regarding Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza. By pressuring universities to crack down on student protest, this action sets a dangerous precedent for restricting free speech, academic freedom, and the right to dissent in higher education. Columbia University, like other institutions under scrutiny, has been at the epicenter of pro-Palestinian activism. The administration's claim that the school has failed to combat anti-Semitism is misleading. Rather than addressing actual instances of hate speech or violence, the government is leveraging allegations of anti-Semitism as a pretext to stifle student protest critical of Israel. This follows a broader pattern in which political dissent, especially when it challenges U.S. foreign policy, has been conflated with discrimination to justify crackdowns. The narrative that Columbia is an anti-Semitic hotbed is contradicted even by Jewish faculty and students, such as oceanographer Robert Newton, who stated that the administration's claims are a complete falsehood. The real reason Columbia is being targeted is because it has been a hub for student activism against Israel's actions in Gaza, including high-profile encampments and protests. Columbia University's leadership, particularly its interim president, Katrina Armstrong, has responded to government pressure with an overly compliant stance. This is not a mere attempt to maintain funding. It's part of a broader coordinated effort to legitimize the Trump administration's ability to withhold federal money from institutions that do not align with its political and ideological positions. By ramping up disciplinary action against pro-Palestinian students and introducing a new committee to investigate critics of Israel, Columbia is providing a facade of cooperation that strengthens the administration's hand. The goal is to create the perception that federal government has the power to dictate campus policies and control the political discourse within universities. This implicit message to other schools is clear: suppress student activism or risk losing federal funding. This move sets a chilling precedent for freedom of education. If the federal government can successfully withhold funding from a university over student activism, then institutions will face immense pressure to censor political speech that does not align with government policy. The New York Civil Liberties Union has already warned that this is an unconstitutional effort to force universities into suppressing speech that is not MAGA approved. The danger is that this tactic will extend beyond just pro-Palestinian activism. Any political dissent, whether on climate change, labor rights, or racial justice, be similarly targeted in the future. This latest development follows previous statements from the Trump administration suggesting that students on visas who participate in pro-Palestinian protests should be deported. The administration has also entertained the idea of expelling U.S. citizen students for the same reason. Such measures are reminiscent of Cold War-era tactics used to root out political dissidents, where individuals were blacklisted and punished for their beliefs. The threat of deportation for international students is particularly egregious, as it weaponizes immigration status to silence opposition. The same logic could be extended to other student movements in the future, making universities a space of political policing rather than free inquiry. The suppression of pro-Palestinian protest mirrors the crackdown on Vietnam War demonstrations during the 1960s and 70s. Just as students were met with surveillance, expulsion, and even violence, such as the Kent State shootings, today's student activists are facing state-backed repression under the guise of combating anti-Semitism. During the Vietnam War era, the government labeled student activists as un-American and sought to crush their movements. Now, pro-Palestinian activists are being similarly vilified, with universities pressured into compliance. The key difference is that today's crackdown is coupled with financial coercion, making institutions more likely to fold under government pressure. The Trump administration's move to defund Columbia University is not about combating anti-Semitism. It's about controlling the political discourse on college campuses. The administration is using federal funding as a weapon to stifle criticism of its foreign policy and intimidate universities into compliance. By bending to these demands, Columbia and other institutions risk turning higher education into a space where government-approved narratives are the only ones allowed. This attack on academic freedom should alarm anyone who values free speech and the right to protest, regardless of their stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. If left unchecked, this precedent will have a lasting consequence, not just for pro-Palestinian activists, but for all students and faculty who dare challenge those in power.